Where do white Americans really come from? Not just where they were born, but their deep ancestral roots. You see, the story isn't as simple as they came from Europe. It's a journey of tribes, empires, wars, religions, and survival. A story written over thousands of years, across mountains, rivers, and oceans. So let's uncover the surprising truth behind the people many call white Americans. You might be shocked at what you didn't learn in school. Part 1. Who are white people? First, let's make something clear. White is not a scientific or biological term. It's a social and historical label, one that was shaped over centuries, not born in nature. In today's America, when people say white, they usually mean individuals with light skin who trace their ancestry to Europe. But here's the catch. Europe is not one single group of people. It's a continent with over 50 distinct ethnic groups, ranging from the Celts of Ireland and Scotland, to the Slavs of Eastern Europe, to the Nordics in Scandinavia, to the Romance-speaking people of Southern Europe like Italians, French, and Spaniards. These groups have different histories, different languages, different faiths, and even different DNA markers. Some came from ancient tribes, others descended from empires. Some were Catholic, some Protestant, some Jewish, and others Orthodox. So when we talk about white Americans, we're really talking about the descendants of many different European peoples. Over time, as these groups migrated to the United States, the label white was used to group them together, often for legal, social, or political reasons. But the real question is this: which Europeans did each family come from? And how did so many different groups get merged into one identity just called white? Part 2. The earliest roots. Long before anyone stepped onto American soil, the ancestors of white Americans were scattered across the vast lands of Europe. These were not modern nations yet, but tribes, clans, and ancient communities shaped by their land, beliefs, and struggles. Some of these people were the Celts, fierce tribal warriors who lived in what we now call Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and parts of France. They built stone fortresses, worshipped nature gods, and told their stories through oral tradition. Further east, Germanic tribes roamed the dense forests and river valleys of what's now Germany, Austria, and the Netherlands. They were hunters and farmers who later played a major role in the fall of the Roman Empire. In the cold north, the ancestors of Scandinavians, Norwegians, Swedes, and Danes lived in coastal villages by deep fjords. Known for their shipbuilding and adventurous spirit, they would later become the Vikings who explored far beyond their lands. From the south came the Latin-speaking Romans of Italy, who built the greatest empire Europe had ever seen. Their roads, laws, and culture shaped Western civilization. And from the east, the Slavs, people from what is now Poland, Russia, Ukraine, and the Balkans, built strong communities and rich traditions, often caught between empires. These early Europeans fought over land, migrated for survival, and clashed over gods. Some settled in one place, others kept moving. But through war, marriage, trade, and faith, they built the foundations of what would one day become Europe, and the distant roots of future white Americans. Part 3. Rise of Nations. By the 1400s, the map of Europe had begun to look more like what we recognize today, but beneath the surface, it was far from united. The British Isles were home to the English in the south, the Scots in the north, the Welsh in the west, and the Irish across the sea. Each had their own language, customs, and ancient rivalries. France had been shaped by the Franks, a Germanic tribe that gave the country its name. In the heart of Europe, Germany was not one nation, but a tangled web of small kingdoms, duchies, and city-states, each ruled by a different prince, count, or bishop. Italy was even more divided, made up of powerful city-states like Venice, Florence, and Rome. These cities often fought each other as much as they traded. It was a time of rising monarchies, where kings and queens claimed divine authority. The Catholic Church, too, grew incredibly powerful, controlling lands, collecting taxes, and influencing governments. Then came the Crusades, religious wars that sent thousands of Europeans to fight in the Middle East. But back home, life wasn't easy. Europe was rocked by waves of violence. Religious wars between Catholics and Protestants, civil wars between nobles and peasants, invasions and endless battles for land. Famine struck when crops failed, and disease, especially the Black Plague, wiped out millions. For the average person, life was brutal. Most were poor. Few had rights. Many were forced into rigid class systems with no way out. It's no wonder that when word spread of a new world across the Atlantic, so many risked everything to leave. For them, America offered not just land, but escape, freedom, a chance to start over, and that hope would change history forever. Part 4. The Great Escape. Between the 1600s and 1800s, something huge began to unfold. Millions of Europeans started crossing the Atlantic Ocean, heading for a place they had only heard about in stories: America. Why did they leave their homes? For many, it was about survival. They were searching for land to farm, jobs to feed their families, freedom to worship, or simply a fresh start away from war, poverty, and strict social systems. The English were among the first to arrive, setting up colonies in places like Virginia and Massachusetts in the early 1600s. They brought their customs, their language, and a strong belief in building a new society. Next came the Dutch, who established New Amsterdam, what we now call New York. The Germans arrived in large numbers, especially in Pennsylvania, looking for religious freedom and farming opportunities. Then came one of the largest waves, the Irish. During the 1800s, especially during the Great Famine, millions of Irish people fled starvation and came to America with little more than hope. Italians, Polish, and Eastern European Jews followed in the late 1800s and early 1900s, escaping poverty, political unrest, and persecution. Each group brought something unique: different languages, foods, traditions, and clothes. They came with big dreams and often little money. And while they may have all looked white by skin tone, American society didn't treat them equally. Some were welcomed. Others faced discrimination, violence, and harsh working conditions. Being white didn't mean being accepted. Not yet. These groups had to fight for respect, for jobs, and for a place in American life. Over time, they would help build the foundation of the modern United States. But in those early days, the journey was far from easy. They weren't just escaping the old world, they were trying to survive in a new one. Part 5. Not all whites were equal. It might be surprising, but in early America, not all white people were treated the same. There was a kind of hidden ladder, a social order, even among those with light skin. At the very top were the English. They spoke the language of power, wrote the laws, owned most of the land, and held the highest positions in government and business. They saw themselves as the true Americans, and often looked down on other European groups. Then came the Irish, many of whom arrived poor and desperate during the 1800s. They were often treated terribly. Newspapers called them dirty, drunk, or lazy. Some signs even read, "No Irish need apply." The Italians were mocked for their strong accents and seen as outsiders. Many were denied jobs and forced into hard labor. They were often linked to crime, even if they had done nothing wrong. Eastern Europeans and Jewish immigrants had it even harder. Many were crowded into poor neighborhoods called ghettos. People feared their different religions, languages, and customs. They were watched closely and rarely trusted. So even though all of these groups were white by skin color, society didn't treat them equally. In America, whiteness came with levels, and not everyone started at the top. Part 6, from Europeans to whites. So how did people from so many different European backgrounds all become known as just white? The answer has more to do with power than skin color. In the 1800s and early 1900s, America was changing fast. Immigrants were pouring in, not just from Europe, but also from Africa, Asia, Mexico, and the Caribbean. With this growing diversity, old European groups that once saw each other as rivals began to see something else. They shared the same skin tone. At first, Irish, Italian, German, Jewish, and Slavic immigrants were seen as separate, often unwanted groups. But as more visibly different people arrived, something shifted. These European-descended groups started to blend into one larger category: white. Why? Because in America, being called white came with advantages. It gave access to better jobs, schools, neighborhoods, and safety. It helped immigrants distance themselves from the racism and discrimination faced by Black, Asian, and Latino communities. White became a kind of shield, a way to blend in and move up. People stopped calling themselves just Polish or Irish and started checking the same box: white. Over time, what once divided them began to fade. In the eyes of society, they had merged into a single powerful identity. Part 7. The Melting Pot. As time went on, the children and grandchildren of European immigrants began to blend together. The Irish married Germans. Italians married Polish. English families joined with Swedes. Different backgrounds, but the same dream: to belong in America. Over generations, their children stopped speaking the old languages. They no longer celebrated old country holidays or wore traditional clothes. They spoke only English, went to American schools, and followed American customs. This is what people call the melting pot. When many cultures mix together and form something new, it created a shared identity, not Irish American or German American, but simply American. But in the process, something important was lost. The connection to the old country faded. Many forgot where their ancestors came from or why they left. The songs, the stories, even the food changed. America gave them a new life, but often at the cost of remembering the one they left behind. Part 8. DNA reveals the truth. Today, millions of white Americans are turning to DNA testing to learn the truth about their roots. Services like 23andMe, Ancestry DNA, and MyHeritage are unlocking family secrets that were hidden for generations. With just a small saliva sample, people are discovering that their ancestry is far more complex than they imagined. Many who believed they were only English or Irish are surprised to find genetic links to Scandinavia, places like Sweden or Norway. Others learn they have Eastern European heritage from countries like Poland, Hungary, or Ukraine. Some uncover Jewish roots they never knew existed, tracing back to Ashkenazi or Sephardic ancestors. There are also results showing ties to the Middle East or North Africa, regions connected through ancient trade routes and migrations. And then, there are even bigger surprises: small percentages of Native American or African DNA. These often point to long-forgotten stories of intermarriage, adoption, or hidden history. All of this proves one thing: history doesn't fit into neat little boxes. It's not clean or simple. It's messy, real, and full of unexpected turns. DNA doesn't care about the labels society gave us. It tells the truth. And for many white Americans, the truth is deeper, richer, and more beautiful than they ever imagined. Part 9. The Power of Origins. So where do white Americans really come from? They come from farms in Germany, from dusty roads in Ireland, from Jewish shtetls in Poland, from Italian villages by the sea. They come from hunger, from faith, from the dream of freedom. They come from war and peace, struggle and survival. They're not just one thing. They're a collection of histories, of identities, of lost names, old photos and fading memories. Here's something to think about. In the next 50 years, America will change. More people are mixed. More people marry across race. More people don't even care about the white label. And maybe that's a good thing, because what really matters isn't the label. It's the story, your story. Knowing where you come from doesn't divide us, it connects us. So now you know, white Americans didn't come from just one place. They came from everywhere across Europe and even beyond. They were once poor, once outsiders, and they made a life in a new world. If you're a white American, your story is bigger than you think. It's not just American, it's human, and it's still being written. If this opened your eyes, hit that like button. Subscribe for more stories that uncover the truth behind the headlines. And share this with someone who's ever asked, where do white Americans really come from? Thanks for watching. And remember, your past is the key to your future.